Hello, and welcome to the Wonkette Weekend Live Chat, where this week we will be discussing very serious people, or just serious people in general. We're not trying to rip off Paul Krugman. This is my NPR voice. I'm Robin Panacchia, and with me, as always, is the lovely and talented Steve Robinson. How
Hey,
you doing today,
Robin.
Stephen?
I'm okay, thank you. And yourself?
I am peachy. I am absolutely swell. I'm liking
Um,
your hair this week.
oh, thank you. That's kind of you. So serious people. This kind of popped up because whenever there's sort of the drum beats of war, and we've been kind of getting it. I had mentioned to you that we sort of had reached the fries stage
Yeah.
of the war pretty quickly. I felt like normally you need a couple weeks, but this happened pretty quickly. And often with war, you start to see people use terms like serious people. We don't have serious people right in charge right now. And it's true
Or
we
the
have
yeah.
it's true that we don't have like a speaker of the house. It's a clown show over there, but I've always taken issue with how folks use this sort of term serious people. It's often pretty condescending, a lack of respect for other people's views, even if horrific. Is the idea that it's being kind of comedic, and which is interesting to me because and I mentioned this to you earlier this week. Before people started saying this, or rather before I was aware of it being used in sort of a political stance, probably around Iraq, um from my college days, just slightly, well before Iraq. The term serious person was a pejorative, like in philosophy, particularly the work of Simone de
Yeah.
Beauvoir and other existentialists, um, for people who their entire identity had been subsumed by a specific structure, and they needed faith and fidelity in that structure. And in fact, serious people would often quickly become nihilist when they were kind of faced with the fact that the world didn't make the type of sense they wanted it to make, which is actually politically interesting because there is a sort of through line of a lot of the MAGA QAnon people who had been perhaps part of sort of a quote unquote serious structure and feeling that it
Mhm.
didn't work for them. And then sort of their only response now is to burn it all down. Um, but what's your take on this, on people who keep kind of throwing around the
Well,
term
so this
serious
is
people?
I saw like 14 different times this week. And this is I think like partly how it came up because we were in the chat cave and like the it was just like this meme of so and so is not a serious person. And like it was just and I just realized like we're seeing that so often just in general now with like both sides of the aisle, usually, probably people who are a little bit more left or whatever. They're not a serious person. And it went right up my ass because it immediately, again, made me think of Iraq and, at the beginning of the Iraq war, right after, or just, Iraq and Afghanistan and like the very beginnings of that. There were those of us who were like, hey, let's not bomb this random country that didn't really have anything to do with anything. And the response to that was, A, you hate America. If you're not with us, you're against us. And you're not serious people. Like I very much recall uh the Daily Show. And they've seen clips of this, and I think you know what I'm talking about here. The
Hmm.
Daily Show did a thing like the day uh they decided to go into Iraq, where they did, a man on the street thing. And the Daily Show, we think of it as being very left, but the people they were making fun of were the people who were anti-war because they were being ridiculous. And the serious people were the ones who were like, yes, let's definitely bomb this country. There are definitely weapons of mass destruction there, even though like there weren't. And there were people who like there was act like it wasn't like, oh, maybe they're there. Like they definitely weren't there. The inspectors said they weren't there. And people are like, let's all just pretend there so we can, then go bomb this country. It'll be great. Um,
The Daily Show had a pro Iraq War bent at the
yeah,
time. I wasn't watching it at the time, so
yeah, online and just apologize to people who were against being, hippie idiots. And so yeah, no, he has apologized for that because it was embarrassing for him because he was wrong. A lot of the time, those of us who are not serious people tend to be prematurely correct, as you are bringing up today with our lady, our gal pal, Barbara Lee, because we love her. And I always call her the prematurely correct Barbara Lee because she's always like 7 years down the line. Barbara Lee had the correct take a bajillion years ago. So, and that drives me crazy because, people act like she's, not to be taken as seriously as other people. Um,
no. Well,
and
she never even gets an apology.
yeah,
Like, she
no.
never even gets "you were right." I mean, there's still a sense upon the left, especially post 2016, folks love the center right folks who are anti-Trump, and so like a lot of never Trumpers who their sole redeeming feature is that they are anti-Trump. That's great, but so is so are most of these leftists you don't like. So it's
Mhm.
just suddenly like, okay, well, you aren't quoting all these, women of color, particularly these writers. It's suddenly like all these folks from the Bulwark, and they were all wrong, not specifically politically, but about Trump. Like, if you go
Like
back and
they're
read
bad
this
at
stuff,
predicting things.
and the idea that's like, oh my God, we need to get some of the astute, savvy political, you know, analysis from Charlie Sykes, who was wrong. If you read all of the type of stuff, a lot of the people early on, there were some, I will say to their credit, who were serious about Trump's threat. Others were like, he won't win. I think it was Bill Kristol for the longest. Again, I'm glad that he is standing firm against Trumpism and the current Republican Party. But I do think it's worth recognizing that at the
Yeah,
time, he was like, no, Trump won't win in Iowa. Despite all the,
yeah,
and he didn't win, but I'm talking about he was going to be blown out. Like,
yeah.
it was going to be um, uh, uh, Paul, Marco Rubio is going to win, and then he's going to win. He's going to sweep it. It's obviously Rubio,
Oh
and
yeah,
it
Rubio
was
was
like a
just going to
complete,
turn the piss off of everyone. Like,
yeah, and it was a complete disconnect from reality. But we still believe that these people have some sort of insight, and what they say about the world is going to be correct. And we see it like in a lot of it's in real time of what they think is going to happen politically. They're often wrong about their own
mhm,
former people. Like,
yeah,
oh, well, now is the moment that, the quote unquote good Republicans will stand up and do X, and it doesn't happen. And they
it's
wind up being
literally
wrong.
never happened ever. Like at no
And
point has it happened. They've never like ever done that. Um,
yeah, a lot of folks, even former Wonkette commenters who really resented Alexandra Ocasio Cortez and others. She's not wrong a whole lot. Like, she was like from the start. So she was one of the first to early calling for impeaching Trump, removing him from office. Certain things she said about Republicans and about their corruption, she was correct about. And then when people come later to the party, she gets no credit. It's sort of, I think, AOC, Barbara Lee, and others. They're like the folks who, in music, right? They're the ones who were originally doing this sound, and then no one listened, and then like later someone gets success in that sound, usually a white guy, and they're like, well, wow, this white guy created this wonderful, cool,
yeah.
hip sound. He's awesome. And it's like, well, okay, well, that lady working at, Walmart, who part-time released this album and few years earlier did the sound earlier. And I
Mhm.
think that's been
Oh, absolutely.
a long-standing problem of what seriousness is.
Because
I did
yeah.
But go on. I'm sorry.
I would say it's also very much a like it's coded as a white male thing because the assumption on the part of white men, a lot like more conservative white men, is that they don't have a bias. Like no one's oppressing them, so therefore they don't have a bias, and they can come at this from an objective point of view. And I actually heard them say this before, so it's not like I'm just guessing there. But there is very much this idea that, like, oh well, women, they think with their emotions, they don't think about, like, the very uh they're not willing to do things the hard way. They want to care about people and whatnot, which actually usually turns out pretty well. Generally speaking, like, it doesn't actually turn out poorly to care about people. um it's never been a time, I think, in our history where sorry, I'm sorry about I'm glitching. I keep seeing the comments. But this is the best I can do. Uh our power's been wonky this week. I don't know what that means.
Oh, I'm sorry. You guys are so catty. So when
I know every geez. But no, it very much is like women are emotional. They think they're hearts and everything, and we think with our heads, and that's always going to be bullshit. Um, I've historically, name one time it's gone wrong. Actually, caring about whether or not people live or die.
well, yeah, it, it's very interesting because I think, and I use that as the thumbnail for the YouTube chat, was the show Secession, which I haven't seen, but again, it
Mhm.
became meme worthy of Brian Cox's character, I believe, saying "You are not serious people," but
Yeah.
particularly it's a white man telling the. And I think again, I haven't seen the show, but it's one of those situations where um, I've seen that meme repeated again by never Trumpers and others who perhaps don't understand that that guy is not right. Like he might be a bad guy or flawed, or his idea of what seriousness is not necessarily something that we should um, embrace. But to go back to the larger philosophical aspect of it, because I think I found something that broke it down pretty well. What you were saying. So the idea is that the serious man dedicates his life and energies to some cause, values, or idol that he considers absolutely good and for which he is willing to sacrifice absolutely anything. So, like the K Hive. I'm kidding. Sorry. Anyway, um, serious men to be the kind of people who enforce authoritarian governments or proclaim that things should be judged in terms of their usefulness. The serious man's absolute dedication to the values he chooses are a way of losing himself, denying his own freedom to choose how to live and what values to pursue. Instead, he takes comfort in letting an external value system dominate his way of thinking. And we do see a lot of that. So, complaints about during the Trump era, it was more of like um, a belief once that our institutions would protect us from Trump and that he couldn't exploit uh, these institutions. And I think a lot of the frustration came is that a what they viewed as a fundamentally unserious man was defeating them. So it
Mhm.
wasn't just it was kind of like the Dark Knight movie. Like the Joker is running game around them, and they can't understand how they're getting beaten by Trump. And they would often say, "No, no, the institutions will hold," and they weren't, or the extent that they prevailed in keeping him from overturning the government, it was very thin. And they also would often talk about the concerns in very large sense of like democracies at risk or institutions are at
Mhm.
risk. So you see like the never Trumpers are more talking about, oh my God, these institutions and normalcy and whatever, which they would often compare to things like, oh no, stacking the courts is terrible. Because so to them it's all about normalcy, not
Well, because like the
changing the system.
institutions have largely protected them, like making everything difficult, and making change difficult, which is why the institutions exist to begin with, is a thing that has largely benefited those people.
Yes.
Um,
And Tom Nichols specifically was talking about at one point complaining that Democrats were talking about racism or trans rights. Again, they weren't creating this. This was in regards
Mhm,
to active attacks against um, abortion rights, trans rights, um, Black history,
mhm.
so forth, Black voting rights, but that what we just needed to sit down and shut up and not talk about that until democracy was preserved, which goes to that sort of serious concept because it's like, well, what is democracy if not
Yeah,
those things? So your concept of it is more of just the institution or an external idol, but not actual people being hurt. And then later he would get very upset because he would see polls with Biden doing poorly amongst voters or matched or even losing to Trump. I'm not going to get into whether the polls are correct. I know people have their own opinions on it, but his view was what I'm talking about, was his frustration that people would be willing to sacrifice democracy because, oh my God, the price of gas is up, or which is such a privileged position. Because if you are someone just living in the world, um, what matters to you is those very, those minor things, that to be able to live, to feed your kids, that's what matters. That's what, when you talk about democracy, what does that mean? Um, and when the serious people sort of find themselves saying that the concerns of people who don't go to their country club, but the people
mhm.
who wait on them, you know, uh, are being unserious by wanting to exist and live in the world. That's that's definitely a concern. Also, throwing to you on this, Robin, I've seen before when people talk about living wage or the price of minimum wage. Um, they say this is not a serious proposal. So the idea of, like, say, if 25 or $35 minimum wage, even in cities that are incredibly expensive to live in, they say that's just not serious. That's not even being serious. Whereas, people
Well,
making
because to them,
billions of
it's, like,
dollars.
horrifying. It's horrifying. It's like, "Oh my god, that would just throw everything off." We're like, that but the thing is that that is actually where it should be right now. If you wanna have like, it actually makes logistical sense. If you wanna have a city or a town with all the things you want in it, like, you want a hair salon, you want a nail salon, you want, I mean, maybe you people don't care about that, like, the rest of you guys, but, um, uh, I certainly do. Um, like, you want, like, places to shop, you want all these things and services, other people have to, like, be able to live there also. Like, those people who provide those services, like, you can't have, like, as much as I think, a lot of people might genuinely enjoy the idea of, yeah, we can pay these people basically nothing. They'll, give us all our food. They'll do all the, they'll do everything for us. That they can't exist in your area unless they're being paid enough to live in your area, or at least at least enough um, to live like somewhere near where you are. And if you can't, provide that, then that is fundamentally, a ridiculous position.
Yeah,
That is un- it is frankly extremely idealistic to think that you can pay people nothing and that everything is just going to like keep working out just fine.
yeah.
Um,
Well, it can't be a living city if you're New York, San Francisco. Now joining that, Seattle and Portland, you need to be able to live in that city. If not, like, your skills are transferable. You could go wait tables at a Applebee's in, you know, um, a more rural town and survive and have a home and feed your family and not have to put up with annoying rich people. And again, the bias is that the it is a serious dilemma that people are facing in with rising crime, particularly where I live in Portland, and of course we see it in Seattle. It is, but the what's deemed as the serious response is always uh, punitive. So
Yeah,
throw more people in prison, uh, throw more, institutionalize the homeless. Like that is serious.
yeah.
Whereas actually, when you've proposed, like, why don't we build more housing, and give people minimum incomes, or for people who are mentally ill, straight treatments, and do other treatments for people with drug addictions or whatever that doesn't involve that, and then raise taxes a bit or whatever, that's seen as unserious. But I think you've mentioned that generally speaking, people often use the term serious as a sort of way of rationalizing cruelty versus compassion.
Paul does use it. Um, People who advocate for austerity and are like, nope, the only thing that we can do here, the serious thing to do here is to cut Social Security, cut all of these, other programs that help the poor, or help, older people. We have to, that's what we have to cut, not, the Pentagon. Like, God forbid, no, we can't. Got to keep, murdering people overseas. But, um, sorry, back to that for a second. Uh, Sorry, having a little bit of an ADD moment here. Um,
Well, I
I
do,
do,
yeah.
yeah, I do believe it is actually probably to make the world livable or the country more livable for people. It just sort of pisses people off. Like the idea of it, and for them, they don't realize that it's an emotional thing, but it's also an emotional thing for them. They are mad about the idea of, God forbid, someone undeserving uh, gets something. I was writing this week about Mary Lou Retton, and I don't know if you guys caught that, but she was in the hospital with pneumonia, and her daughter, she did not have health insurance. Like millions of Americans across the country, except she kind of decided, I'm not going to do this on purpose. I'll take the risk, rather than not being able to afford it, which is pretty
Quite a
shitty.
risk.
It's be like, I'll pay into the system, I won't pay into the system, and then when I need it, need other people to go fund me, and then I'm the only person who benefits. So that's some bullshit. But the she got so many donations. The last I checked, it was at like 375. People were so willing to just funnel all kinds of money towards Mary Lou Retton. Some broad gave her like $50,000. $50,000. Like, oh, I'm just gonna give Mary fucking Lou Retton. I guess it'd be
Well,
Mary
yeah.
Lou fucking Retton. $50,000. Like that is more than most people in America make in a year. That is horrifying. It's also horrifying that it costs $50,000 to have even a rare form of pneumonia that we can't name for some reason. Um, like it's really an ass backwards way of doing things. Like it's not. It doesn't actually make any sense. But people are like, "Oh my god, no, you couldn't get rid of the insurance companies. Well, what would happen? It would be madness. Be absolute madness to get rid of these, companies whose actual job it is to take your money and not give it back to you. Like that is their
Hmm.
job. That is like the ultimate purpose of health insurance companies. Um, no, we need that. That is a great institution. And they insist on doing things illogically and then call themselves, oh, we're serious. We know that you can't have single payer. That would just be chaos. Then people would have to wait in line. Like,
Yeah, I
no.
one of the worst things Rush Limbaugh had said, but like one of the worst things that had a grain of truth to it that I will get to, was that feminism existed solely to give ugly women access to the mainstream of society. That's a terrible statement. But if you look back at it, the idea of a system where no matter how you look, your success in the world does not depend upon the male gaze. So the idea that
Mhm.
because there were women who were opposing feminism for certain reasons of like, hey, this system kind of works for me because I fit into
Yeah.
that system of the the male gaze and so forth. And though I will somewhat cattily note that I living in New York, I would knew folks like that who were like, hey, this is great, I love this system, and then they turned 40 and were like, this system sucks. It's like, yes, it sucked when you were 20 and whatever, but whatever, I'm glad you finally realized it. But the idea with where I'm going there is that what you want with sort of ideas of socialized medicine or other things is that it doesn't matter. You don't need to be a cute kid. My
Yeah.
kid is cute. So if I put my kid out on television and said, hey, my cute kid has cerebral palsy and he needs access to these things, please give money, he would make $1 billion in a week. That shouldn't be that kid way. It should be that
Okay,
no
but
matter
I
who
will
you
say
are, we
your kid is
access.
freaking adorable. But guess what one of the issues with the GoFundMe,
Yeah.
healthcare things are?
Yeah. It's
Woke
based
kids
on
get a lot more money.
Oh yeah, and it's based on how you look, if we know you. And sure,
Mhm,
like look, if um I've done this before, I've contributed to funds for writers who have had financial setbacks
yeah.
because they worked in a
I'm a
system
big
that
fan
did
of
whatever.
mutual aid.
And I was like, I need to help this guy. Look, this guy produced work that kept me alive when I was a teenager, and it sucks. This person is broke now because he
Mhm.
never were paid fairly for their work at the time. So of course I'm going to contribute. But I think do that now, kind of like with tipping. We shouldn't have tipping in America. We should have a different system, but we
Yeah.
should tip now and then try to make the system uh, better.
We
Uh,
should have a tipped we should have a living wage for people who make tips, but we should also still have tips. As someone who used to live off of tips, it's a lot better to live off of that than to, get minimum
yes.
wage.
Well,
Sorry.
I will drop in the Adam
I know.
Conover statement of how tipping is fairly sexist and racist and
Fair.
obviously inherently biased. If you don't tip now, you're an asshole, but you should. We should have a system where people are paid for their job performance at a living stage, and they're not. It's not rooted in like whether or not some asshole finds a woman attractive, or if they just had a good day. Like, say I've got a good, I'm gonna get laid tonight after this dinner, so I'm gonna tip a lot. It's not, someone's night should not be dependent upon.
Sorry, I just
um,
really thought you insinuated something for a minute. I was like,
No,
wait a
no,
minute. No, like, okay.
no, I just don't think that should be how it works. It's like, look, whatever I wrote should get,
Mm.
yeah, I should be paid based on that quality of the work, not whether like, you know, how I look or the conditions in which someone is reading that work or so forth. So, but yeah, I mean, back to the art, the kinds of seriousness as we see right now. The same folks who are very much about war um, and often are using that term of like the serious response is to avoid any sort of sense of one compassion, but also that things might be complex. So I think from
Mhm.
either side, you get people who um, want, I view, or maybe perhaps a more simplistic view of things. And so they don't want to. So it's easier for them to be like, you're not being serious. A serious person sees it very black and white, which is actually not, I would consider a mature way of viewing the world. But
Or in terms of what's most advantageous for the United States.
which is certainly true. Be honest about that. Like certain things
Mhm.
are based on your sense of what is advantageous for the United States, what benefits. I mean, you know, America is itself an empire. The idea of like who do you help, who do you not. Um, it's interesting also because there's a sense of, to use comic book terms, with great power comes great responsibility. So the idea is that America is very powerful, so we should help weaker people. We don't always do this, but I tend to, as from my own naive point, be more inclined to be like, oh well, we should help people who are being there's a dictator torturing these people. We should help the poor people who are being tortured, and we should help these people. We should use our resources to help people across the world. That's not necessarily what motivates our foreign policy. Our foreign policy is obviously geared differently.
We do not.
No, our foreign policy is usually geared to what our to what is in our best interests long term. Which, look,
I mean,
as
actually,
far
the
as
one thing I will
empires go,
say
this
that I
work.
do think we do well when a Republican is not in office is uh, family planning things across the world. And I think that's awesome. That's a good thing that we do when we don't have Republicans in office. Otherwise, we're not super great. Speaking, sometimes dictators are friendly. Sometimes we think it's great when other countries invade other countries and steal their things. Sometimes we're like, no, that's bad. And it's very, not necessarily arbitrary, but it also very much depends a lot of the time on what America's interests are more so than like what is the compassionate, sane thing to do here. Like, um,
Well,
sorry, I'm
spreading
trying to be
democracy
really
is
vague because I'm not supposed to be saying things, but
well, spreading
what am I
democracy is not
doing?
always what we do. I mean, because you have to work with people who don't necessarily support. You do sometimes have to do lesser of evil type issues. I get that. Um, but I think it'd be better if we were more honest about it. We're not
I
very
mean,
honest
really,
about it when it
have we
comes.
ever actually spread democracy? Because we have not. Like, I think like not once have we successfully done it.
Well,
We've
yes, there's arguments that it's very dangerous. It is hard to do it. That's the
yeah,
people who don't support nation
and we've
building.
overthrown democratically elected leaders before. We've done that to replace them with like a military coup, um, like with a guy who threw people out of helicopters. I'm obviously speaking of Pinochet here, but like we've done that. We have not actually, to my knowledge, spread democracy anywhere.
It was surprising to me that I think maybe it's because a lot of mainstream Democrats don't talk to the left or even to minorities who they claim is the base of the party. But when Trump was specifically running on America First, there became a sense of from a lot of the mainstream Democrats that that is overtly racist and um, insular and isolationist and not what that's not true liberalism and that's not what people want. And then we're generally gobsmacked. So again, the serious people
Mhm.
were generally gobsmacked that people actually supported the no, let's just take care of our own people idea. We don't actually do what you say we're doing very well. And these are nice fancy words you're using, but it just gets seems to me just comes into I don't have a job and then my brother comes back home without his arms. So I don't like this. And it was something that I felt Trumpism specifically was tapping into. And people were surprised by. I know, though, I think, Sanders, I think, was talking about some of it at the time, but it wound up again being spun as being sort of inherently bad to be sort of quote unquote America first.
Well, I think very much what happened was like what you said earlier. Like the people who, I mean, I'm not excusing obviously anything that they believe, but the people who were like, yes, I believe America, let's do the Patriot Act, you're with us or you're against us, and all these other things, and really like bought into that and bought into what the serious people believed and what they said would be good for everyone. And then, when people find out that it's not, they get, you know, kind of bad, and then they've got the fire of the converted, and that can be, melded into something good, and it can be melded into something bad. I'm a jaded bitch because I like really like I'm super jaded about things because like I've been pretty much on the Barbara Lee train, I guess, since childhood. So like by like nothing surprising me. Like, oh no, yes, we're just terrible. That's anything that's slightly good I'm happy about, but I'm not expecting anything.
Oh yeah. Well, if you think of general American patriotism as being a serious man devoting yourself to these idols, these ideas, um, what de Beauvoir and others had written was that sort of the idea is that when you fail to realize these goals, the serious man or woman, this is back in the 50s, but the serious person will often turn into the quote unquote subman or the nihilist. Subman being just sort of giving up, and the nihilist also
Mhm.
being willing to burn it all down. We've seen this. One is sort of people not voting at all because it doesn't matter. At sort of cynicism, and then also the burn it all down crowd when people act as if. And I was reading something again from Tom Nichols, wanting very desperately to believe that is all about 2016, all about Trump, which is not to me a serious bel belief, to use that term. It's very much
Mhm.
almost like the ideas, and he mentions actually that he likes science fiction or whatever, as do I. But it's like sort of the great man concept. Like there's one person, and if you remove that one person, if you stop, if you let Joan Collins get hit by a car, then you keep the Nazis from winning is sort of not particularly how the world works. It's usually patterns over time. And the clear pattern was over time a sense of um the potential we saw. The Tea Party movement was in many ways a sort of nihilist movement, a burn
Oh,
it all
yeah.
down movement. And then later, so a lot of these people who believed what Republicans were telling them, and
And
even
also who
Democrats, what
believed in
everyone's
the
telling them.
yeah, in the
Go ahead.
American dream, which was an evil thing to do to people, because like, that never actually happened. Just adding that in there.
Well, yeah, they believe the dream had been denied to them, so they are going to go with those who are going to burn it all down or give them the dream. So, and I've always warned about this, and people get antsy when I bring it up, but it's like again with 2016, and now one of my concerns about 2024, if your position is that everything is great, it's very tough because if for people who don't feel that way, because then they're going to go to the person who says, no, 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 I hear you, everything isn't good, and I'm going to fix it, even if they aren't going to fix it, even if you shouldn't believe Trump, or there's no reason you should believe he's going to help you. But if the other person is like, I'm not going to help you, it's like if I have cancer or something, and one doctor's like, no, you're fine. And the other doctor who's a quack is like, no, 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 well, I'll give you some kind of magic juice or something. I was like, I'm desperate. Give me the magic juice. And so I think that becomes something of where you need to. Um, but as Tom Nichols was saying, like the idea that anyone who would actually prioritize their own existence, so they feel like gas costs too much or food costs too much, that and they can't get health care or whatever, that they to either not vote or to allow Trump to come back into power and ruin democracy is inherently unserious. But I feel like what is to me unserious is to believe that people aren't going to behave like human beings. I find that the people who insist that people behave differently than who they are being unserious.
Sorry, am I back? Sorry, can you hear me now?
She's back.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, we've our lights were flickering yesterday. Who knows what's going on? So,
Yes,
yeah.
you have to use too much data. Oh, Missy's being very nice to you.
Let's hope so. Hi, Missy.
All right. Well, we'll wind it down so that you can get some more uh,
Well, I
save
have
up your
more
data.
bars now. It stopped, like, I have all the bars or whatever now. So hopefully that fixed it, whatever that was. Because I was on like little one thingy. Um,
That is true. The Great Man is more suitable to sci-fi than actual. Yes. Whenever you sort of can say that Trump was the one person, and I think never Trumpers agree with this. And then, I mean, Tom Nichols is hardly a Hillary Clinton fan. I mean, Hillary Clinton supporters are the
mhm.
ones who are like, she was the last chance between us and the Armageddon. And then, but Nichols believes that Trump winning was certainly the key element that caused the downfall of civilization, but that it was more the fault of Democrats for running Hillary Clinton, which, I'm not going to get into those arguments. Those are tedious, but the point is, it's all rooted in this one instance, this one sort of whereas I just don't see it as that. I don't see it as that easy, um, and I'm sort of difficult about it. It's like just I think it's far more complicated, and a lot of what was happening, the idea that one election could have prevented what had been occurring over the past 10 years or so, or even longer, the slow buildup and steadiness, and instead of hastening it even further, like um that Hillary Clinton's victory, if let's say she had one, wouldn't cause, I mean, there's a clear pattern of Republicans getting more radicalized whenever they lose. I mean,
Oh yeah.
they've never accepted. So much, and no one wants to hear that. And that's probably Tom Nichols' problem, is that a majority of white people in America have never fully embraced democracy. If you define democracy by like everyone who's different having a say, so multicultural democracy, like what we were doing, obviously, when people owned slaves was not actually democracy,
Yeah.
right? Or when women were property, or when uh, queer people were closeted. That is hardly
Yeah.
democracy in any sort of functional way. So
But this is the
ever since
thing.
it,
When things are working for, like, I'm gonna say, like, again, like straight white men, for like those who have power, they think that everything's going well and they're not looking down at what's going on with everyone else. They don't realize that they're like, oh, this must be fantastic for everyone. It's like how the right is always talking about, like, oh man, the 50s, those were great. Those were the best times ever. Because they're thinking, oh, that's what, when things work for me. Right now you see all these like trad people and whatever trying to like recreate their weird thing. They pretend it's not a kink, but it's totally a kink thing, where they're like, oh, I'm like submissive to my husband, who may not exist half the time. Like, I let the man be in charge, I won't vote, I'm just gonna you know
oh yeah,
cook and clean all day, because you'll hear these women saying, like, oh, women voting ruined everything. Like, they think it, like Ann Coulter wasn't saying that 20 years ago.
well,
um
I don't disagree with that point of view. I think it needs to understand that yes, for these people, arguably it was much better when didn't have to compete
yeah,
against anyone who wasn't a white cis
yeah,
male. It's probably going to be pretty cool getting jobs or whatever. And if you are a lot of these white dudes who fell into Trumpism and fell into the sense of the legitimate kind of anger and rage came from suddenly I have a woman boss, I have a black boss, I'm no longer the power leader. And if you're black, the world is very different. The trajectory has
yeah,
been better. But we can't discuss that, and we can't talk about why these racial groups vote differently or view the world differently. Well, because their experience of the past
yeah,
50, 60 years is dramatically different. And so, in a weird way, when you have Martin Luther Green talking about civil war and a race war, when she's dismissed as being non-serious, well, no, she's evil, but she's actually recognizing what exists in the world. When you have sort of serious people like liberals who are
mhm,
like, I would get this all the time. Like, people insist to me that, like, oh, it's not a zero-sum game. Everyone should want this wonderful feminist utopia where everything's great. And it's like, well, not. There are people who are losing, even like women who are losing their status when people get more options or more freedom, and they're going to fight against you. And if you act as if, why is everyone upset about all the greatness I'm giving you, then you're going to be in a bad position because you're unaware of how
yeah.
half the nation is. And that's been sort of one problem with a lot of serious liberals of regress. They just completely are gobsmacked that half the nation is pissed.
I mean, here's the thing. I think there's like very little understanding of the fact that, like, when things are fucked up, the people who are experiencing the fucked up things, like, will be affected by that. Like, it's not this, I'm just not really explaining this correctly. But like, if you're not able to go out and earn a living, if you're not able to, support your family or even just support yourself, if, things are really bad for you, say if you're, in one of those towns where they, all the water is poisoned, like all these different things collectively will affect you. And it's the same thing. and people don't always respond to that with this like burst of love and rationality. uh, and I think the same thing. We're very quick to say like, oh well, those people are just crazy. Oh well, those people are just bad. They're just like bigots. And like, yes, they are those things. But also a lot of the time when people become bigots and become terrible, it's because they're like, this is how I'm getting ahead, and that's fucked up. But we also shouldn't create a world where that isn't one way for people to get ahead. um I was talking with someone recently about the fact that, embarrassingly enough, there are a large amount of very racist Italian Americans. We've all seen Do the Right Thing, but a lot of the reason, like, there's an interesting trajectory there, in that, like, if you read like the old Italian newspapers, um, when they first came here, they were like, "The fuck is going on here with like you know the race relations situation?" Because they were from a foreign country. They were like, "White people are really fucked up." But then they stay here for a while and they're like, "Oh, it would be to our advantage to like be like super white also, and we'll be terrible and racist and prove to other people, look, we're just like you are, also racist." Like,
Yeah. No, I mean,
and it's not good.
whiteness is very appealing, or rather, as I call it, being an American. To
Yeah.
fully be American, it's not about white. This means that this is what makes you an American: whiteness, and you're not, if the extent that you are not one of those things. It's very interesting. Something I'd seen that similar to what you were talking about was when often I will come across certain very serious liberals who will express some sort of both shock and horror that on inauguration day 2009, the big day for Obama, that Republican leaders had gathered together to figure out how to block him and stop him. They're just horrified by that. And I was like, but wait, what are you talking about? They just gotten their asses kicked. Like, they were slaughtered. Like, he routed them at electoral level. Democrats, like, had a super majority in the Senate. They had, even more seats in the House. It was very dire for Republicans. What do you think they're going to do? Like, just all dance together or TikTok? Like, what were you guys doing? What were you guys doing on 2016? So I'm sorry. Like, Team Evil is at least aware we got our asses kicked. We need to stop this guy or it's going to get worse. And we need to figure out how to do this for our own ends. And the flip was
Yeah.
that it was like, look, if you're, but and the very serious people all the time, it's like, well, I'm just rooting for Trump to do well because when the president does well, we all do. No, no. If Trump does well, a lot of good people are going to suffer. How are you
It will
defining
be
that?
very
And
well, because that's the normal decent thing to say.
it is
I
nonsense.
do like a lot of those people when Obama was elected, they were like, "Oh my God, the institutions failed us." Because you saw these people like on TV being like, "But we are not ready for a black president. We had to prepare more." I don't like I that saying will kill me forever.
Have to
We're just not
prepare
ready.
more. No, I don't think.
Like,
I
we
mean,
didn't set the table. Hold on.
they were going to go, like, Republicans don't like losing. So anyone who kicked their ass at that
Yeah.
point, that
But,
degree of
oh yeah.
loss, they
But I
would go
also
out.
think like they were like, well, I guess the institutions are bullshit now.
Yeah.
They
I
didn't
think
wait
they're,
until
yeah.
we were ready.
I think they were going to certainly exploit his, both his race or how he was
Oh yeah.
different. And I think that's the issue that I think a lot of, again, very serious liberals don't get about exploitation. So it's just this idea that, well, how dare Republicans exploit, sexism against Hillary Clinton? How dare they exploit sexism and and racism against um, Kamala Harris? If she were the way, I was like, well, okay, but we can't wave a magic wand. No one's going to be guilted into not being those things. So they can
Yeah.
exploit those things, but you need to counter them in some way other than, oh, wow, people are very mean.
Yeah.
There was another whole week of this of where Harris willingly because she was willingly, and he's also there was an Atlantic article and this other article where she had willingly participated. Like they, the reporter had come to the house, she was whatever, and she got trashed, and or rather, it just didn't. I wouldn't say trash. It just wasn't necessarily flattering or articles, and everyone's like, oh, the media has it out for her, and that was it. It's like, okay, well, if the media has it out for our potential future nominee, we're in big trouble. So either there's a plan, but just saying, it's like if we were to do a play, right? You and me, gee, Robin, the critics hate our play. Now let's
Yeah.
go. Like, no, well, that's bad. Like, no one's gonna show. Like, what's our plan? How do we counter the bad reviews? How do we do
Yeah.
something? It's like it's so
Turn it
mean.
into a musical.
Yes,
Sorry,
exactly. For only murders in the building. I still wish that they had actually just given us the full musical,
I want the whole musical so badly. I like
like
will
just
watch
as
it.
a special.
The Meryl
Instead of
Streep
having
song,
it,
I watch like 4 times a day.
oh no, she's great. Steve Martin's Pickwick
That his
Sisters.
Patter song, I like.
It's so good. He's very very good. And it's one of those shows makes me miss my late mother all the more. She was a tremendous Steve Martin fan, and she would have adored him in this because he's really really good at the top of his game.
My dad
Um,
just kind of looks like Steve Martin.
that's also good,
No,
even
no,
in
if
his
you
youth.
combined like Steve Martin and Charles Grodin, that would kind of be my dad. So like a white guy.
Yeah. I think my mother was a big fan of The Jerk and
Oh
the
my
film
god,
The Jerk.
everyone loved the jerk.
And there's just the whole scene of where he's dealing with the racists who don't want to, and they're like, we have to sell to your building, to rent it to the right people, you know, no, uh, no eggplants. It's like, yeah, well, we don't want any vegetables here. Obviously, that makes sense. And then it's like, well, yeah, well, no. They're trying to get him to understand their racism. It's like,
Yeah.
well, no, no jungle bunnies. Like, well, you don't want any bunnies. They'd eat the vegetables. And my mother just adored. They eat the vegetables.
Well, he was
So
born a poor black child.
yes, as he gets very upset when he used the N word. He's like,
Yeah.
"Sir, I am an N word." He starts beating them all up. It's a wonderful moment. So
Yeah. That
yes,
movie is
but I
actually
think
why I learned how to play the ukulele. Fun fact.
I think any discussion of serious people must end and conclude with The Jerk, a discussion of
Absolutely, absolutely.
um. So, but any other
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's just that
Well, well,
you're a
honestly, I
bad
don't think
person for
like
believing that.
she's fine. I don't think that we want her for any reason weighing in on anything involving like sex and sexuality, porn, anything. Given certain things that some of us might be kind of pissed off about.
Well, yeah, I
Um,
mean,
like
it's one
says
of
the
those.
pasta, it's bad. Like
It won't. I know you're apparently a bad person for believing that. I don't know how. Like, there's no like. I'm kind of the person. Not the same. I'm the objective man. I'm just sort of like, okay, well, it's like sort of I'm doing a meeting and you're there with your concern, and someone else's sort of their response is like, well, don't have that concern. It's like I don't think that's gonna work. Like, how do you address? You need to address the concern somehow, and like, no. Well, she's Robin's a racist. It's like, okay, well, I tend to think name calling never works. Like people
yeah,
don't like it. I'm always sort of I get pushback forever. So like I think deplorable is particularly not great. It was used against us because people
yeah.
just don't like being called. Even if you agree, it never works. Like people
I've been
who
wondering though, like, why haven't we been able to do the same thing with that? Like, because their whole thing is degenerates now, and they're all like obsessed with calling everyone degenerates. Why haven't we been? We need to be able to flip that one somehow. Like, everything's a they're obsessed with degeneracy. It's so creepy.
well, it works. I mean,
Um,
those are certain things because it's
yeah,
like it is also something that doesn't have a class stance to it. It's a certain kind of no no one likes this perception of elitist talking down to them.
yeah,
Whereas like, Granny Clampett would call someone a degenerate, right? Like, yeah, no, it's like sort of like kind of common sense
yeah.
salt Europe
I
type
can see
stuff.
that. Yeah,
And people don't like, and so I think the Democrats, and particularly never Trumpers, because they're our new best friends, but they are some of the most classist, snobby people. So it's just
oh
whatever
yeah,
was a weakness amongst Democrats that cost Democrats in 2016, they responded by embracing the worst of those elements that are getting pushed out of the Republican Party, which is like, we are better than you. We're going to sneer our nose at you. You know,
Yeah.
expertise matters more and everything like that. And like, when Clinton referred to Trump supporters being cult members, they need to be deprogrammed. Again, it's easily manipulated because no one likes that. Like,
Yeah.
it's not effective. It's not necessarily an effective argument that someone is a cult member. No one
Yeah.
likes being told that. So you got
Yeah, it doesn't really work. One thing that I would like to see an end to is the idea that like there being an explanation for something in some way means that you're defending it.
Mhm.
Like if you can say like, "Hey, this is like the trajectory of what happened and created these people. Let's be aware of that for, like just for future reference." It's like, "Oh, well, you're making an excuse for them. Why aren't you just agreeing that they're bad?" I'm like, "Yes, I agree that they're bad. We should also pay attention to like what creates monsters." It's this part like that's part of, it's certainly not the whole reason why we don't think that child abuse is a very good idea, but we also know that like that doesn't necessarily lead to, that can often lead to like people having like fucked up adult lives. Um, I do think that it needs to stop being like an oh, you're justifying things thing.
That had often been the case, and I think some of this goes back to if
Like
I
unless we're totally ignorant.
I don't again I don't like to make points in history
Yeah.
all about something, but I do think the one of the big things about 2016 was this sense of, I do think anything that came from Sanders and the left became like, had to become not something we can embrace or support. So the idea that even at the time, this was somewhat viewed as popular, like that's when suddenly people were saying populism, anything that was populism is
Yeah.
inherently bad and racist. Trying to appeal to working class people, trying to appeal to these people is like inherently bad. And I would have people tell me with straight faces, very different. Well,
Yeah.
his appeal is very different than like, we should be trying to reach, people in other parts of the country who don't have college degrees or whatever, but that's different. You should do it differently. And it's like, okay, we've got to figure out how to do that because they vote. And I feel like if Democrats become in a situation where they're almost like Republicans being like, well, anyone who's not in the demographics that we need are bad and we need to keep them from voting somehow. We haven't gotten that far, but it's just like, well, that's even worse because these Republicans are
Mhm.
like, we're just going to keep these people from voting, and that's what we can demonize them. But Democrats, it's like, well, let's demonize these people, and I guess we can guilt them into voting for us. And I don't know how
Well, I
that
think one thing that I do see a lot, like especially with centrists, is this idea that instead of getting people angry about like what, is happening to them and their lives, like, oh hey, you know, your kid can't afford school lunch, all these, they, don't get them angry about that. Get them to feel aspirational, like, make it more like a you too can do this if you are just really good and moral and perfect, and then everything will be great. Because the problem is with people not being good enough, not with the system. um when in fact
yeah.
we have a system that, does not make it so like it's a pyramid, like people are going to be at the bottom. It is a pyramid scheme. um like,
Yeah,
capitalism is
fairly true.
literally a pyramid scheme.
And it was appealing to the ideas that my kid, and most people are self-involved, right? So that's why pyramid schemes are effective far more than collectivism. So the idea is that I can make sure that my kid has the best future and best
Yeah.
life, and that's what it was promising. But then it got to a point where even that was not necessarily working. Then it was like, okay, well, my life is terrible and my kid's not going to even make it. It's, you can kind of notice that your kid's not going to be on the platform to success. It's not even like
Yeah.
I'm working around the clock and I come home and my life's going to suck, but my kid's going to do well. It's very clear that, okay, my kid is like starving and my kid is not going to
Yeah.
the right school, or my kid is not. So it became much more likely to be like, right now I am pissed. I think so, so the
Yeah.
aspirational thing became not as
Effective.
effective, and trying to find the ways to surround that. So we're almost here at time. Any I read everything you write. Robin, of course, you had earlier referred to something you'd written. I, of course, read all your work. Everyone should. Um, I'm from the old school of when I worked for a newspaper, you had to read the entire newspaper. So I, of course, read all of the Wonkette since I work for it. And but everyone who does, please check out Robin's stuff. What do you have tomorrow for us?
Oh, oh my God. Sorry. Trying to forget that, I'm bringing that, thing, the Kids Online Protection Act. I think that's what it is. Oh, Kids Online Safety Act. Unfortunately, we have a lot of Democrats, I think like 22, who are supporting a very, very messed up bill. Like, that is called the Kids Online Safety Act. Basically, it will block a lot of sex education. It will block a lot of like LGBTQ information, all kinds of things that like kids kind of need or especially teenagers when they're figuring out who they are. Um, it is, so I'm just going to probably do a little bit of a splainer on what's going on with that. Not happy that Elizabeth Warren is supporting it. Hopefully she'll find out what it is and then be like, oh, absolutely not. Because I actually do generally trust her to go that way. I do. So I'm looking at that. I was also looking at the Turning Point thing because those people suck.
Oh yes. Uh Bob Menendez, his felony indictment collection, and even though in Louisiana, things are going to get worse in Louisiana because the governor is now a pretty far right. Is going to be a far right Republican. Our sort of brief
Yeah.
period of a Democrat in office blocking some of the worst stuff that the
Yeah.
legislature was doing will probably end. So some people are going to suffer. I'll probably be working on that into the next week.
Oh,
And
actually, I've got as far as Louisiana goes, I've got a lot of info on the death row people who have already been denied. But go ahead. Sorry.
yes, and so yeah, that's but yes, Daniel Cameron is most likely going to lose in Kentucky based on the pattern. So that will be great. He is a terrible human being. It seems like he is someone who just outright sucks as a person, and despite his politics. So it's just not, I think that even people in Kentucky who have elected both Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul overwhelmingly are still going to be like, yeah, we're gonna stick with Andy Bashir, which is great. So that's it. Thanks again for joining us. As always, like, share, subscribe. I'm Stephen Robinson, and I'm often asked, "Who is that woman you talk to each week?" And that and
Oh,
and
you
that is
did.
well, no. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows Robin Panacchia, my colleague at Wonkette, and I am honored to
I
speak
know.
with every
Look
week.
at you pronouncing my last name correctly. I'm teasing. I'm teasing. My last name is difficult to pronounce, so like, I
All righty.
joke.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We will catch
Yeah.
you again next time.